Chapter 11. Confrontation. Tommy supposed you could get used to anything after enough time. And strangely enough, it didn't take long for him to get used to his new job in the syndicate. The next few weeks passed by in a blur. Tommy spent as little time at home as possible, which wasn't exactly hard when he was always either at the cafe or spending time with Wilbur. The first syndicate member to need Tommy after their official negotiations was Rosethorn. Tommy had closed the cafe already and was going through the standard motions of cleaning when he'd received a text from the villain saying she was already outside the back door. When he let her in, he'd grimaced at the long slash she had across her back, but it wasn't too deep and therefore wasn't that hard to heal. Before Rosethorn left, she used her powers to grow a daisy in her hand and tucked it behind his ear with a grateful smile. And Tommy pressed the flower between the pages of an old book when he got home. His payment had been deposited in his account the next day. Thankfully, Tommy didn't share a bank account with Tubbo and Ronbu, otherwise they would have gone ballistic at the huge deposit Tommy had inexplicably received. Even though he didn't want the two of them to know about the money, he still took the opportunity to use the cash to pay the next 2 months' worth of their rent to their landlord. Then, using the little that was left over, Tommy tried to make a subtle grocery trip, and restocked their fridge in a way that Tubbo and Ronbu wouldn't notice. Somehow, neither of his roommates seemed to question why the milk that had definitely been close to empty the day before was suddenly full. In fact, Tubbo and Ronbu didn't seem to question much of anything in those following weeks. The two were always distracted. It wasn't the same purposeful silence as before, although Tubbo was still taking care to ignore Tommy when he could. But most of the time, the two just seemed out of it. Ronbu had always been a bit spacey, but he was even more out of it than normal. And when Tommy poked his arm when he didn't respond to one of Tommy's questions, the boy had flinched back, as though he had been burnt. Tubbo was similar. He would stare blankly at his computer monitor, fingers still on the keyboard as he got lost in his own thoughts. Other times he would turn on the news without a word, watching whatever the latest report on heroes and villains was with a strange twist to his lips. Another thing Tommy noticed, Tubbo's hands shook now. He wasn't sure when that started, but he knew the constant trembling in his fingers wasn't something that had always been there. There was something wrong with both of them, and despite how much Tommy wanted to help, he couldn't do that if they wouldn't talk to him, and they had made it clear long ago that they didn't want to talk to him about their problems. The next syndicate member Tommy healed after Rosethorn was Daedalus, who had to take off part of his armor to reveal the hole in his shoulder. Despite Daedalus's reputation as a ruthless killer who had scorned his fellow heroes, Tommy found that the man wasn't all that intimidating when you actually spoke to him. The entire time Tommy was working on his shoulder, Daedalus rambled about his dog and how he was trying to teach her how to roll over, but she seemed to just be trying to trick him into giving her treats. The healing gigs were tiring, but Tommy could manage well enough. Sure, he was burning himself on the espresso machine more often than ever because he kept letting his focus slip. And sure, the bags under his eyes were starting to worry Puffy, but it was fine. The healing wasn't causing his lack of sleep. More than anything, it was just hard to fall asleep when the tension in his apartment was thick enough to be cut with a knife. At the very least, Tommy got a reprieve from all the stress when he hung out with Wilbur. Despite how busy the man seemed to be with work, he still made time for Tommy whenever possible. The two would go out to get food at least twice a week, and Tommy had gone over to Wilbur's house several more times since that first day. Sometimes, Techno and Phil would join them, and sometimes they wouldn't, but Tommy didn't mind either way. He loved hanging out with Wilbur, but he also really found himself enjoying his time with Techno and Phil too. They were all just so easy to joke around with and be around. It was such a drastic difference to the eggshells he was walking on back home. So despite the stressors in Tommy's life, he had to say, things weren't going too badly. Until everything went to shit in the span of a single night. It had been a normal day at the cafe. Foolish had been eager to leave, Eret waiting for him by the door like they always were now when Tommy came to take over. After a quick goodbye, Foolish had dipped, and Tommy had gone through the evening rounds with practiced ease. At one point, a woman with pink hair and a kind smile gave him a tip that was more than the cost of her drink alone. Later on, a man brought his dog into the store, which he told Tommy was a wolf-husky mix, and the sweet thing licked his face when he gave her a small cup of whipped cream with the man's drink. It had been a good shift. Wilbur was busy that night, but Tommy didn't mind as he bounced around the cafe after closing, humming a song Wilbur had showed him under his breath as he mopped the floors. The lights in the cafe had been turned down low, and Tommy's eyes drooped as he swiped the mop back and forth. He was still smiling from those two nice customers, and even though he knew he was going to have to go home to his icy apartment soon enough, the hazy warmth of happiness clung to his skin as he went through the closing routine. A buzz from his phone startled him out of his reverie. Immediately, Tommy set aside the mop and clicked open the phone to see who was texting him. Jester. You around? Tommy. Yeah, I'm still at the cafe. Jester. Okay, I'll be over in 5. Jester. One of the only villains who hadn't come to see him yet. Tommy was a little surprised that Jester was going to come over, considering how rarely he seemed to get into physical fights. Jester was all about using his wit to get the upper hand. Similar to Siren, he wasn't a brute force fighter. Instead, he outsmarted his opponents, aiming to confuse and delay them instead of fighting them head-on. If he had gotten hurt, that meant he must have been cornered. Tommy rushed to finish the closing routine so he wouldn't have to do it after he healed Jester. He finished mopping the floor and scrubbed down the counters at record speed, his shoes squeaking against the wet tile as he then raced to prepare the back room. After having more experience with using the back of Puffy's cafe as a makeshift clinic, Tommy knew how to prep the area to minimize his cleanup. He laid a few towels down on the ground near the back door, dragging the first aid kit out from under the sink and popping it open so he could grab bandages if Jester was actively bleeding. Then, he filled up 2 cups of water and set them nearby, one for himself to drink after he was done healing, and the other for Jester in case he was thirsty. Then, he waited. He sat down on the tile and watched the door, counting the seconds until the knock arrived. It had been a little over 6 minutes since Jester's text when the knock rang through the back room. Leaping to his feet, Tommy rushed to the door and swung it open, revealing a hunched-over Jester. Tommy's eyes swept over the man, searching for any sign of blood. To his surprise, Jester's white button-down shirt was free of any bloodstains, and although his pants were dark, it didn't seem like there was any blood on them either. However, Jester definitely seemed as though he was in pain. His left arm hung limply at his side, and he was tipping to the left, as if holding his shoulder up was too much effort. Even though his face was completely covered by his mask, Tommy could tell he was grimacing. "Sup, kid?" Jester greeted, although his voice was tight with pain. "Here, come in," Tommy said, stepping aside and gesturing for Jester to get out of the alley. Once the back room door was closed, Jester settled himself onto the towels Tommy had laid out without having to be asked. His left arm was still limp, and he let out a hiss of pain when he had to sit down. "Did you break something?" Tommy asked, figuring that was the likely explanation, given the lack of blood. Jester nodded. "Yeah, that fucking smiley-faced bastard nearly crushed my collarbone," he gritted out between his teeth. Tommy frowned. It wasn't surprising anymore to hear about the things Dream would do to the villains. The slash across Rosethorn's back had been 404's doing, but the hole in Daedalus's shoulder was thanks to Dream. Still, collarbone? The collarbone was a bitch of a bone to break. "Shit, man." Tommy winced, settling down on the ground across from him. "Did you at least land any good hits on him?" Jester snorted. "I managed to land a pretty nasty scratch with some claws I grew, but shifting was a bad idea, because I think I fucked up the bone even more." Oh, great. If Jester had been stupid enough to use his shape-shifting abilities with a broken bone, this could be way more fucked up than it seemed. "Kind of a dumbass move if you ask me," Tommy muttered as he reached for Jester's arm. Jester pulled back immediately, and Tommy raised an unimpressed eyebrow at him. "I need to get an idea of how bad the break is, idiot." Why? Can't you just heal it without all that? Jester questioned. Tommy resisted the urge to roll his eyes. I don't know about other healers, but that's not how my powers work. If I'm healing a stab wound, I need to be able to hold the skin together. If I'm healing a broken bone, I need to at least try to shift the bone somewhat back into place before I heal it, or else it could heal wrong. Tommy, unfortunately, had learned that the hard way. One time, he'd broken his thumb when he accidentally smashed it in a really heavy door. He tried to let it heal itself, but the bone had healed incorrectly, and he ended up having to get Tubbo to re-break it so he could fix it. That hadn't been a pleasant evening for anyone. There was a beat of silence as Jester considered him. If you don't trust me with your injury, I don't know why you agreed to me being a healer for your little club in the first place, Tommy deadpanned. Either you let me do my job or I'm kicking you out so I can go home. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, Tommy regretted it. Even if the others in the syndicate seemed to like him, Jester was still someone who Tommy hadn't gotten to talk with much yet. He really shouldn't be so rude to a supervillain, especially not one with as much power and influence as Jester. But to his surprise, Jester laughed. I can see why Siren likes you so much now, he chuckled, flinching when it shifted his arm again. Anyway, yeah, go ahead and do your thing. Sorry I'm being an ass, I've had a bit of a night. Tommy instantly relaxed at the reassurance. The nice thing was that all of these villains seemed to have an unusual amount of patience for his sharp tongue, which was good for him, because Lord knew he needed to learn how to think before he spoke. Alright, I'm not going to do much right now, just feel around for a sec, Tommy explained as he reached for Jester's shoulder again. His hands delicately ran over the fabric of the shirt, and Jester hissed in pain. Tommy poked at a few spots, wincing when he felt a bone that was definitely out of place. Shit, okay, that's not good, Tommy muttered as he tried to poke around more of his shoulder. I don't think a doctor is supposed to say that, Jester huffed. Well, I'm not exactly a doctor now, am I? Tommy shot back, carefully feeling another piece of bone. Okay. This is going to be tricky, but I think I can heal this without having to move it around too much. But it's going to hurt like a bitch for the first few seconds. Let's just get it over with, Jester said. Nodding, Tommy put his other hand on Jester's shoulder and mentally mapped out how he was going to do this. Then, once he figured out what he thought was the best way to move things, he let his hands glow as he quickly pushed on the shoulder to get the bones in the right place. Motherfucker! Jester shouted. Tommy didn't pay attention to him. Instead, he kept his grip on Jester's shoulder tight as the energy from his hands seeped into the man's skin, shutting his eyes as he focused on healing the injury as quickly as possible. By the time Tommy was done, his body was aching, but it was manageable. Dropping his hands from Jester's shoulders, he slumped back down onto the floor before leaning against the wall. Don't move yet, Tommy ordered through half-lidded eyes. Wait a few minutes to let it settle. Got it, Jester muttered, carefully scooting over until he was leaning against the wall next to Tommy. The two were quiet for a few moments. Tommy's ragged breathing evened out as his heart slowed, and the familiar pressure behind his eyes settled in. Beside him, Jester seemed to be doing much better already, the tense line of his shoulders gone as he was finally free of the pain that had been plaguing him. It was then that Tommy remembered the water. Do you want something to drink? Tommy asked, shifting to reach for the 2 glasses he'd set aside. Sometimes healing can make you thirsty. Jester glanced his way. Sure, he said, reaching out with his good arm for the cup. Tommy handed it to him, taking a sip of his own water and sighing as the cool liquid ran down his throat. Then, Jester reached up to take his mask off, and Tommy nearly choked. What the fuck are you doing? Tommy yelped, leaping backwards while trying to cover his eyes. I can't drink with my mask on, Jester said, as if it were obvious. Tommy squeezed his eyes shut and turned away from Jester. You should have given me a warning, dude. I'm not allowed to know your identity, remember? Jester snorted. Tommy, I'm literally a shapeshifter. So? So I can change my face to look however I wanted to. I wasn't going to show you my real face, he explained, the smirk evident in his voice. Oh. Yeah, okay, that made a lot more sense. So it's okay for me to look? Tommy asked. Dude, it's fine, turn around. Taking a deep breath, Tommy forced open his eyes and turned back around to see the fake face Jester had put on. Tommy shrieked when he met his own eyes. Do you like it? Jester asked with Tommy's face. Tommy gulped as he stared into his own eyes, thinking of how this reminded him of some kind of fucked-up funhouse mirror. He wasn't sure if it was better or worse that Jester's voice stayed the same. That's just fucking wrong, Tommy said with a wince. Can you change to something else? Jester snorted, and then his face was swirling as it turned into something else. Tommy clenched his jaw when he recognized Siren's face, blindfold and all. Not that either, Tommy spit out, already growing annoyed at this game. Ugh, such a tough crowd, Jester groaned, before his face began to swirl once more. This time, when Tommy was met with the grinning visage of Mayor Schlatt, he let out a startled laugh. Okay, that's kind of funny, he admitted. The Schlatt-faced Jester grinned wider in front of him. Hey kid, I'm Mayor Schlatt. What do you think of our great city? I think you're doing a shit job as mayor, and that you falling off the stage during that one speech was pretty funny, Tommy said, matching Jester's grin. Oh shit, yeah, I was so drunk that day, Jester mocked, struggling to make his voice sound gruffer to match the mayor's actual tone. I can't get through the day without having 3 drinks, and even then I'm still strung tighter than a horse on steroids. Tommy let out a startled laugh, and Jester continued to smile as his face swirled and changed once more. When Dream's smiling mask settled in front of him, Tommy knew he was in for a treat. Oh, hello, number 1 hero, Dream, Tommy greeted, dipping his head in a fake bow to the man. What are you doing in Eastside? Wait, shit, I'm in Eastside? Jester joked, looking around as if in alarm. Ew, gross, I don't want to remember poor people exist. Well, do you have any advice for a poor teenager like me? Tommy asked, just barely holding back his giggles. Jester scratched his chin in thought. Well, kids, he began, attempting to mock Dream's school PSA voice. Always remember the 3 most important things. Eat ass, suck a dick, and sell drugs. Tommy was full-on laughing now, clutching his stomach as he struggled to catch his breath. Jester was laughing right alongside him, and any remaining anxiety Tommy had about being around the villain was long gone. Jester, it seemed, was actually pretty cool. The laughing quieted down, and things fell quiet as the 2 of them caught their breath. Tommy leaned back against the wall next to Jester, and silently, Jester's face began to swirl again. This time, Tommy didn't recognize the face Jester was wearing. It seemed like that of a young man with dark eyes and black hair, but what caught Tommy's attention was the long scar that ran through his left eye, turning it a milky shade that Tommy was pretty sure meant the eye was useless. Who is that? Tommy asked, narrowing his eyes at Jester. No one important. Just a random face I saw on the street, Jester explained, although there was something off in his tone that Tommy couldn't read. Something was nagging Tommy the longer he stared at the strange face. Like the blur that usually accompanied Jester's transformations wasn't there anymore. If Tommy didn't know any better, he'd almost consider that maybe, just maybe, this was Jester's real face. But Jester wasn't going to show Tommy his real face. He barely knew Tommy, and Tommy didn't want to know anyone's secret identities. No, this had to just be a random face he saw, and Tommy was looking too much into it. Am I good to go now? Jester asked, startling Tommy out of his thoughts. Tommy blinked, taking an extra second to remember what Jester was talking about. Oh, yeah, I think so, Tommy said, disappointment washing over him at the idea that Jester was leaving so soon. Try moving the arm a bit and see how it feels. Jester rolled his shoulder, eyebrows raising in surprise before rolling it again. God damn, that feels good as new, he said, smiling at Tommy again as he rose to his feet. Thanks, man, that's amazing. Tommy used the wall to push himself up as well. No problem. Just please don't break it worse next time. I really don't want to have to try and heal a bone that's in several pieces. Snorting, Jester pulled his mask back over his face. I'll do my best, Dr. Tommy. Walking over to the back room door, he put his hand on the door handle, but paused. You're a good kid. I hope you know that. Where did that come from? Heat rose to Tommy's cheeks at the unexpected compliment, and he quickly shook his head to try and hide it. I'm getting paid for this, dipshit, he muttered, struggling to make his words sound even the slightest bit gruff. No need to get all sappy. Jester laughed again. Of course, my bad. I'll head out now before I embarrass you further. Yeah, get out of my cafe, Tommy teased. Giving him one last wave, Jester swung open the door to the alleyway, only to immediately freeze when there were two figures standing in front of it. Tommy stiffened up, his heart jumping into his throat as his eyes struggled to make out the two figures in the gloom. Tall and short, one wearing something bulky on his face and the other... Oh, it was Nuke and Ender. Oh, fuck. Tommy, still frozen behind Jester, jumped when Jester broke the stony silence. I have to say, this isn't the kind of place I'd expect to run into you two. Jester joked, although there was an underlying tension in his voice. What the hell is going on here? Nuke asked, looking between Jester and Tommy with his arms folded over his chest. What's it to you? Jester snapped, the joking in his tone having evaporated almost instantly. I mean, civilian, supervillain, meeting in the back of a cafe in the middle of the night. You can see why we're concerned, Ender said, gesturing between the two of them. It was then that his eyes dropped to the floor of the back room. Wait, is that a first aid kit? His head whipped back up to Jester. Are you hurt? Not anymore, Jester said, rolling his shoulder again. But that's none of your business, so I recommend you two get out of here. Completely ignoring Jester, Nuke stepped into the back room to face Tommy. You helped him? He asked, something accusatory in his tone. Tommy bristled under the weight of Nuke's glare. What, was he supposed to be ashamed of healing people? So what if I did? Tommy challenged. Jester came here with a broken collarbone, so I healed it, because I have healing powers. What's the problem with that? Both Nuke and Ender stiffened at this. You healed a villain? Ender asked. Shit. Well, since the cat was out of the bag, Tommy figured he needed to find a way to do damage control, so the vigilantes didn't get too pissed off about the situation. I did. Yeah, it's kind of a thing, Tommy explained, fighting the urge to curl in on himself. He shouldn't be embarrassed about this. He was helping people. Sometimes villains come to me to get healed up after bad fights. I've never been approached by a vigilante, but if you guys ever need help, I'd be happy to offer my services. Was he even allowed to do that, since he technically worked for the Syndicate? He wasn't sure, but if any of the villains said anything, he didn't have a problem with telling them to fuck off. He could heal who he wanted to, damn it. Is that what you were talking about with Siren? Nuke practically hissed. Yeah, it was, Tommy told him. We were working out details, like how to get in contact with me and stuff. He decided to leave out the part about the Syndicate paying him. That would probably make it look worse. So let me get this straight. Ender spoke up, drawing all eyes back to him. Villains come to you here at the cafe so you can heal them with your powers? And this is, like, something you volunteered for? You're not being forced into it. Tommy shook his head. No, I'm not being forced. Probably not a good idea to mention that time Blade technically forced him to heal Zephyrus. That was kind of a one-off. Does that answer all your questions? No, frankly, it doesn't, Nuke snapped. But first I want him out of here, he said, pointing at Jester. Jester snorted. You have a lot of nerve trying to tell me what to do. What, you guys think I'm just gonna leave Tommy here alone with you guys, when you're about to interrogate him? I think Siren would skin me alive if I let you two idiots hurt him. At that, Ender gasped in shock, while Nuke let out an odd, strangled noise. We never hurt him, Nuke protested immediately. "Why would you think we'd ever hurt Tommy?" Ender asked, and he sounded so genuinely hurt in that moment at the implication that it made Tommy ache in sympathy for him. The genuineness in Ender's question seemed to catch Jester off guard too.
I mean, you two seem kinda pissed at him,"
Jester offered, although his confidence from earlier was thrown off.
"We're trying to protect Tommy, not hurt him,"
Nuke snarled, taking a step towards Jester.
"We protect civilians from people like you." "Yo, dude, chill. I wasn't meaning to offend,"
Jester said, raising his hands. Nuke looked as though he wanted to take another step forward. Jester may have been tired from his previous battle, but he was fully healed, and Tommy knew that Nuke and Ender had already gone after Jester unprovoked in the past before. He doubted Jester would have much issue fighting with them a second time, especially if he could justify it as keeping Tommy safe. Tommy couldn't let them fight again. He didn't think the two vigilantes would hurt him, especially if Ender's horrified reaction was anything to go by. No, he could handle this.
"Jester, it's okay."
Tommy cut in, before Nuke could get closer. "You can go, I got this."
"Are you sure?"
Jester asked, sounding concerned.
"Yeah, I'm fine,"
Tommy reassured, having a feeling that while he might be in for an annoying conversation, he wasn't in danger. Jester stared at him for a moment, as if considering just ignoring him outright. But after a few tense beats, he sighed and made for the door.
"Fine. But Nuke, Ender, I hope you two know that if you fuck with him, you're gonna have the entire syndicate on your asses."
Nuke bristled at the comment, while Ender nodded.
"We understand. We're not going to hurt him,"
Ender told him. Jester shared a look with Ender, and after another moment, he waved and headed out into the alley. As soon as he stepped out of the back room, Nuke slammed the door to the alley shut, leaving just the three of them inside the cafe. The two vigilantes stared at him expectantly. The silence was heavy, the buzz from the bright lights above their heads only adding to the suffocating sensation.
"Well?"
Tommy started, when Nuke and Ender didn't say anything.
"Well?"
Nuke parroted.
"What the fuck do you mean by that?"
"I mean he's gone now. What do you want from me?" Tommy asked, glancing between the two vigilantes.
"Do you guys want my number so you can get healing too? I can probably work out a schedule so you don't show up here at the same time as villains, but this clinic would have to be a neutral zone where no fighting can happen."
"Jeez, Tommy, we don't want healing!" Nuke suddenly shouted, cutting Tommy off.
"We want to know what the fuck you're doing healing villains."
Tommy frowned. "I mean, they need help, you know?
Heroes really fuck them up sometimes, and they can't get medical care like the heroes can." "So that just makes it okay to help people who hurt others?"
Ender asked in a much softer voice compared to Nuke.
"You don't know why they do what they do,"
Tommy hissed, glaring at the two of them.
"For all you know, they could have good reasons for being villains. And even if they don't, that doesn't mean they all deserve to die in goddamn dirty alleyways because they couldn't get to a hospital."
Nuke scoffed.
"Who the hell says they were dying? Heroes aim to incapacitate, not kill."
Tommy scowled.
"Me? I say so, because I'm the one who's actually been healing these goddamn wounds, and let me tell you, the heroes claiming they just try to incapacitate is a load of bullshit,"
he told them, wincing as the memories of the hole in Siren's stomach and the burns tracking across the Natus's frame filled his mind.
"Wait, really?"
Ender chimed in.
"Yes, really. The whole reason I started doing this was because I found Siren passed out in an alleyway one night with a hole blown in the middle of his fucking gut a few months back."
Now that startled both the vigilantes into silence. There were a few beats as the two took in the information, and Tommy almost wanted to smirk at how well that had shut them up, until Nuke spoke again.
"So you found Siren unconscious, dying, and instead of calling the authorities or leaving, you saved his life. I got that right?"
Nuke asked, a deathly calm having settled over him. Tommy nodded.
"And you didn't tell anyone you knew that this happened?"
Tommy frowned.
No. The only people I could have really told were my roommates, but I didn't want to get them involved in any shit in case that came back to bite me in the ass."
Nuke scoffed.
You don't think that maybe it was better for your roommates to know if you were getting involved in some deep shit like that?
I wanted to keep them out of it, Tommy argued.
And yet you volunteered to keep healing villains, which arguably could have just put your roommates in more danger.
Ender pointed out, arms folded over his chest.
I did what I thought was best to keep them safe,
Tommy snarled, not liking the direction this conversation was going.
They're not involved in this shit, so stop bringing them up. No, I am gonna keep bringing them up,
Nuke snarled right back, stepping up so he and Tommy were face to face.
You've been involved with the fucking Syndicate for months, and you didn't think it was a good idea to tell your roommates anything? What if the Syndicate got tired of you and killed you or something? What the hell would they have done then?
The Syndicate was never gonna hurt me, Tommy shouted, using his height advantage to try and tower over Nuke.
You don't know that. There was no way you could have known that for sure, and the people you live with have a right to know about that kind of shit.
Through Nuke's gas mask, Tommy could make out the faintest outlines of a pair of eyes. This was ridiculous. Tommy was getting scolded for lying to Tubbo and Ronbu by two random fucking vigilantes who knew nothing about his situation. They didn't know that Siren took him out to McDonald's to say thank you for saving his life, or that Tubbo and Ronbu also were refusing to tell him shit. These two had no right to try and butt into his life like this.
Why the fuck do you care this much anyway?
Tommy yelled, glaring at Nuke.
You don't even fucking know me, so it's not your goddamn problem.
Immediately, Nuke stepped back. There was another suffocating silence as the vigilante just stared at him, his hand curled into fists at his sides.
You're wrong,
Nuke said, in a low voice, reaching up to the strap that held his gas mask on his face. Tommy's eyes widened as he realized what he was doing, but before he could say anything, Nuke was yanking the mask off.
It is our problem.
Tommy's breath caught in his throat. The gas mask was off. Familiar bleached hair with overgrown brown roots fell over his stormy blue eyes. And suddenly, all the pieces fell into place. Tubbo. Tubbo was Nuke. His head whipped over to Ender, and despite the fact that he hadn't moved to take off his mask, it was clear as day that he was staring at Ronbu. Tubbo and Ronbu were Nuke and Ender. Tubbo and Ronbu were vigilantes. That was the secret they'd been hiding from him this whole time. That was why they'd been so pissed at him these past few weeks. He'd been lying to them while they knew he was full of shit. But they'd also been lying to him. Wait. Holy shit. They'd been lying to him for months.
What the fuck?
Tommy whispered, eyes darting between the two boys.
Are you fucking kidding me right now?
Tommy, we know we've been lying.
No!
Tommy yelled, cutting Tubbo off.
No, you don't get to fucking reveal that you're fucking vigilantes and start scolding me about being a liar.
He snarled with a white-hot type of anger he'd never even heard from himself before. Tubbo was shocked into silence, the rage fading from his face as he stared at Tommy with wide eyes.
Do you even know how fucking horrible the past few months have been for me?
Tommy exclaimed, the words spilling out as the anger swelled in his chest.
I have been agonizing for months over the fact that you didn't trust me and how I was worried I did something wrong. Not to mention I've been doing everything in my goddamn power to make sure you two would never be affected by the shit I was doing with the Syndicate. And you mean to tell me you've been going out and fighting villains for even longer than I've been healing them?
It was all futile. This whole time, all the secrets that he'd weighed down himself with, all the fighting and arguments about hypocrisy, it was all for nothing. Because he'd never been keeping Tubbo and Ronbu out of danger. No. They'd been throwing themselves headfirst into danger without even thinking of how Tommy could be affected.
I can't believe you fucking pulled the what if the Syndicate killed you card just now, Tommy snapped. Not when you two have been going out and fighting villains without even considering that maybe I should be clued in.
We didn't want you to worry, Tubbo shouted, jumping back into the argument.
We thought that you would be scared if you knew we were going out and fighting villains, but apparently you don't have any goddamn problem with villains, considering you hang out with them on a regular basis. I'm giving them medical treatment. Literally, what is so fucking bad about that? You're healing murderers, Tommy. The heroes are murderers too, Tommy argued. Heroes, villains, one side isn't good and one side isn't bad. Heroes are lying bastards who manipulate the media to hide what they're really doing. Villains at least are honest about that shit they pull. Oh, so it's okay if they're honest murderers then? Ranbu suddenly jumped in, despite having been silent for most of the argument. Apparently, he'd slipped his glasses and mask off at some point without Tommy noticing. Seriously, you're acting like we like heroes. We nearly got killed by Dream a few weeks ago. Oh shit. Tommy remembered the footage of Dream fighting New Contender, and how later that night, Tubbo and Ranbu had come home in a much worse mood than usual. Tubbo had been hunched over. Nuke had taken a brick to the chest. I could have healed you, Tommy exclaimed, turning to Tubbo with a whine in his voice. If you had just told me about this, I could have probably healed you so many times over. Yeah, well, after we saw you hanging out with Siren, we didn't think it was a good idea to reveal our identities to someone working with the Syndicate. Tubbo spat, narrowing his eyes at Tommy. Tommy blinked, needing to take an extra second to process what Tubbo meant by that. They didn't trust him. After everything the three of them had been through together, they didn't trust him, after seeing him talk to Siren one time. What, did you think I was going to turn you into them or something? Tommy asked, trying to keep up the same anger as before, but struggling as his eyes began to burn. Maybe we did, Tubbo shot back. You were pretty damn adamant that you weren't a hostage when you were talking to Siren, and you even shoved Ranbu when he tried to help you. From what we could tell, you really didn't like New Contender. Tubbo. Ranbu cut in, his voice low. Don't say something you'll regret. Surprisingly, this actually made Tubbo falter. He shut his mouth before more hurtful words could tumble out, but the damage had already been done. No, it's fine if you don't trust me anymore, Tommy hissed, digging his nails into his palm to try and distract himself from the tears threatening to spill over his cheeks. It was the first lesson we learned back in the system, right? We can't trust anyone. It's my own fault for thinking you two might be different. Tommy, wait, he didn't mean it like that. Ranbu cut in, taking a step in between him and Tubbo. Tommy snorted. Don't try to bullshit me. I know what you both meant. There was a beat, as Ranbu and Tubbo shared an uncomfortable look. Ranbu clearly trying to urge Tubbo to say something to try and piece back together the shattered situation. Taking a breath, Tubbo met Tommy's eyes, the anger having faded completely from his face. Look, Tommy, I didn't... A shrill beeping noise cut Tubbo off, making all three of the teenagers wince. What the fuck was that? Tommy asked, glancing at Ranbu since the noise had seemed to come from him. Sighing, Ranbu dug into his pocket and pulled out a small black device. It's our alert system, he admitted, guilt flashing across his features as he tapped on the screen a few times. It tells us when there's criminal activity in the area. What is it? Tubbo asked quietly, stepping up beside Ranbu to see the screen for himself. It's a robbery, Ranbu said, making Tubbo curse under his breath. Tommy frowned. Wait, where? He moved over to Ranbu's side to try and see the screen as well, but Ranbu immediately pulled the device close to his chest, blocking Tommy's view of it. Ouch. Now that hurt. Ranbu seemed to regret what he'd done the second he saw the pain flash in Tommy's eyes. He held the device back out in clear view so Tommy could look, but Tommy didn't want to take the obvious pity gesture, since it was so clear they didn't trust him to see their tech, even when he knew what they were doing. You guys should go take care of that, Tommy said, his voice rough. You're vigilantes. You got a job to do. But Tommy was still... No, we're done talking, Tommy snapped, cutting Tubbo off. Nuke, Ender, get the fuck out of my cafe. Ranbu gave him a wounded look, while Tubbo's face only showed a split second of hurt before anger slipped back over his features like a mask. They both geared up again, and Tommy internally cursed himself for not recognizing the two of them sooner. For fuck's sake, Tubbo even had the same hair. But he didn't voice any of this internal frustration. Instead, he just leaned against the wall with his arms folded over his chest,
glaring at the two as they packed up to leave. When Tubbo swung open the door to the alleyway to head out, he spared a look back at Tommy.
"This conversation isn't over. We have a lot more to talk about when we get home,"
Tubbo said, in a voice that wasn't as angry as before, but wasn't anything close to warm either. Tommy didn't bother responding. If he opened his mouth right now, he wouldn't be able to keep his voice from cracking. With one last pointed look from the two vigilantes, they stepped out into the alleyway, letting the door swing shut behind them. As soon as the door was closed, Tommy rushed over to the slide to deadbolt it into place, ensuring no one else would be able to come in. Then, finally, Tommy was alone. As soon as the realization that he was alone hit him, his porcelain composure that had been cracking at the seams for the past 20 minutes finally shattered. A loud sob tore its way out of his chest as he slid to the floor, burying his face in his knees as his best friend's words played on repeat in his mind. They didn't trust him. His two best friends, his family, didn't trust him anymore. They had been lying to him for months. It was only then that another realization clicked into place in Tommy's head. Tubbo and Ranbu had powers. Of course, both boys knew about Tommy's powers, given that he had discovered them with Tubbo. Considering the two had never brought anything up about themselves, Tommy had just assumed neither of them had powers. They were all certainly close enough to know about each other's powers. Or at least that's what Tommy had thought. But no. Ranbu could teleport, and Tubbo could create explosives from his hands. Those weren't minor powers, and it was yet another thing the two of them had hidden from Tommy. Tears soaked Tommy's jeans as he leaned his head against his knees, struggling to take full breaths as he replayed the conversation over and over again. Maybe he shouldn't have kicked them out. Maybe he should have asked them to stay, asked them to explain when they stopped thinking of him as family. Maybe he wouldn't have liked the answer, but it would be better than being left to wonder. Maybe it would be better. He wasn't sure. "Fuck!" Tommy shouted, twisting his fingers into his hair hard enough to make him yelp in pain. He hated this. He hated this entire fucking situation. How the hell had everything in his life spiraled so totally and completely out of control? Tommy was very grateful the back room of the cafe was pretty soundproof as he screamed curses and slammed his fists into the wall. His head was a mess of racing thoughts and red-hot emotions, and the only way he could think to express it all was to yell until his voice went hoarse. Eventually, Tommy started to calm down. Struggling to catch his breath, Tommy stared at the ceiling of the back room, counting the smudges on the ceiling as he thought about what he was going to do from here. He should go home. The logical thing to do was to go talk to Tubbo and Ranbu and try to work this out with them, to find out where everything had gone so wrong. But he didn't want to. He was exhausted. The idea of rehashing the argument so soon made him want to curl into a ball and hide in a dark corner until everything just left him alone. He wasn't ready to hear them say it yet. He wasn't ready to confront his family falling apart. Tommy's hand was on his phone before he could even fully figure out what he was going to say. The phone rang in his ear, and he tried to match his breathing to the dial tone to calm himself down. It was only going to be harder to explain if he was still a blubbering mess. The phone only rang twice before it picked up. "Tommy, why are you calling so late?" Wilbur's concerned voice rang out over the tinny speakers, and Tommy almost had to bite back another sob at how relieved he was to hear his friend. "Wilbur." Tommy's voice cracked and he winced, the tears already threatening to make a reappearance at the mere thought of even talking about the fight. "Tommy?" Wilbur questioned when Tommy didn't speak again. "Are you all right? Is something wrong?" "I'm okay," Tommy managed to stammer out, although it was painfully obvious by his tone that he was not very okay. I can't... Shit, where are you? You're not hurt, are you?" Wilbur asked, something rustling on his end of the call. It was easy to figure out that Wilbur was probably rushing to put on his shoes. "I'm not hurt," Tommy told him, not wanting to send the man into a total panic. And I'm at the cafe." "I'm coming to get you," Wilbur said, his footsteps echoing through his phone speaker. "You don't have to," Tommy told him quickly, despite the fact that he desperately wanted to see Wilbur right now. "I'm not in danger or anything." "Doesn't matter. I'm still coming to get you." Tommy could hear the sound of a door slamming behind Wilbur. "Are you going to take the train?" Tommy asked, not hearing anything in the background to indicate he was with Techno. "No, I'm going to drive," Wilbur explained, and there was the sound of a car engine rumbling to life. "I thought you couldn't drive." "Legally? No. In theory, kind of." Despite how miserable he felt at that moment, Tommy couldn't help but chuckle. "Please don't get into a car crash on your way here. That'll just make my night worse." "I'll do my best," Wilbur replied, and Tommy could practically hear the smile in his voice. "Do you want to stay on the phone while I drive? I should be there in about 10 minutes. Tommy glanced at the towels and first aid kit still strewn across the floor of the back room and grimaced. "No, it's okay. I need to finish cleaning up first." "All right. I'll be there as soon as I can." "Thanks, Will," Tommy whispered, gripping the edge of his sweatshirt. "Of course, Toms." And with that, Tommy forced himself to hang up, not trusting himself to stay on the line for any longer without bursting into tears again. Instead, Tommy tried to use the fact that Wilbur was going to be there very soon to get himself to stand and clean up. His hands were slow as he folded up the towels and shoved the first aid kit back under the sink. Everything felt as though it were moving in slow motion, the chaos of earlier having completely stripped away all of his energy. He cleaned up the back room without much issue, considering Jester hadn't been bleeding when he came in. There was no sign that the villain had been there at all, and there was also no sign of the vigilantes that Tommy had had a full-on screaming match with. It was as if the fight had never happened, although the dried tears on his cheeks confirmed to him that it did. Tommy was waiting outside the cafe doors when Wilbur pulled up. He'd been leaning against the wall, staring at the faded stars through puffy eyes, resisting the urge to watch the rooftops for any sign of two familiar vigilantes. The car came to an abrupt stop, almost making Tommy chuckle at how bad Wilbur's driving seemed to be. But the laugh died in his throat when Wilbur jumped out of the driver's seat, rushing over to stand in front of him. Wilbur looked Tommy up and down, as if checking to make sure Tommy hadn't lied about not being hurt. Then, his eyes settled on Tommy's face, and his jaw clenched. Tommy figured his eyes were pretty red right now. "You look like shit," Wilbur said softly. "Yeah, I kind of feel like shit," Tommy admitted, sniffling and rubbing at his eye with one hand. It was then that Wilbur opened his arms in silent invitation. Tommy didn't hesitate to collapse into the man. It was all just so much. First he'd been stressed about Jester, then Nuke and Ender appeared, and then Tubbo and Rambu turned out to be Nuke and Ender, and then they'd had a horrible fight. So much had happened in such a short span of time, and Tommy felt like a twig that had been snapped in 3 different places. "It's okay," Wilbur reassured Tommy as a wet patch grew on his jacket. "I've got you." He had his arms wrapped around Tommy's back, rubbing circles into his shoulder blades as Tommy cursed himself for crying even more that night. After a few minutes of this, Tommy forced himself to pull back. "I got into a really bad fight with my roommates," he told him, ducking his eyes to the ground. "I don't want to go back to my apartment tonight." "You'll stay with me," Wilbur said, as if it was the easiest thing in the world. "I have some extra PJs you can change into, so you don't have to go get anything from your place." Tommy's smile was small, but genuine. "Thank you, Wilbur. I'm always going to be here for you," Wilbur replied, throwing an arm around Tommy's shoulder and guiding him to the car. "Let's go home, so I can have Techno make you some of his famous hot chocolate. It's some of the best you'll ever try."
I think I'd like that, Tommy replied, the smile staying on his face as he climbed into the passenger seat. Nothing was okay right now, but at least Tommy had Wilbur.